It's rolling. Welcome everyone to the next episode of the Purposely podcast. I'm super excited today. We have an international guest all the way from New York. Welcome, Annie Scranton.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. So we're going to hear about Annie's story, and Annie has an amazing story. She's worked at some of the biggest TV stations or news companies in the US. So I've written some stuff down here. She's worked at the CN, Fox News, ABC, CNBC, and she now runs Pace PR, her own PR agency.
That's right. That's pretty much it. I was a TV news producer, as you described, for the first 8 years of my career. So worked as what's known as a booker here in the States. And so those types of producers are responsible for finding the best guests to come on the show for the anchor to interview for the various segments. And then 10 years ago, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. I started my PR firm. It's called Pace PR, and we're sort of on the other side of the equation, wherein now clients retain us to get them on television, but we also focus a lot on print placements, digital placements, and articles, and radio and podcast interviews too.
Wow! So if you in Australia, we have barbecues, and I'm sure that you barbecue in the US. I've watched lots of food shows, and you guys love barbecuing. We're not allowed to go to barbecues here. We're still in stage 4 lockdown, as I was telling you before we started. But if you rock up to a barbecue and you're meeting new people, and they say, "Oh, g'day, Annie, what do you do?" How do you explain what it is you do? Like, what's your elevator pitch?
My elevator pitch is I get people on TV.
Yeah, love it.
That usually piques the interest of a lot of different people. But basically, if someone themselves has a story to tell, or they work for a brand or a company that they believe, has a message and a purpose and a story that's interesting, that's doing some sort of good in the world, or that they could, with their expertise, help people understand various issues of the day, then we work with those people and those brands and companies to sort of get them featured more prominently in the news, to build the awareness and to grow the credibility of the brand as well.
Amazing. And everyone wants to get their head on TV, don't they? Like, everyone's like, "Oh, I'd like to be on TV." Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people, as soon as you say that word TV, usually people sort of perk up, and say, "Oh, what do you mean? I could be on TV?" And it's like, yeah, if you have expertise truly in a field that, is considered newsworthy, then yeah. But, a lot of people say to me, "Well, I work at a startup. I don't know. Nobody really knows about us." Well, that's what PR is for. Timing plays a very important role in all of it. But really that doesn't matter too much. It's just, sort of knowing the ins and outs of how to tell that story and at what appropriate times to the various journalists.
Yeah, and this program and podcast is all about storytelling. I think that people learn and connect through stories. So why don't we go back in time and hear the story of Annie Scranton and how you got into the TV biz? Because I've watched some shows about what the TV industry is like, or the media industry is like in America, and it's pretty cutthroat. So how did you end up being interested in that field? And go back as where did you grow up, and what's your kind of family influences that molded this interest for you? And let's hear the story behind the story.
Okay, I'll tell it. It really all started out, I grew up in New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore, in the States, and had a great, fairly normal, sort of childhood and family experience. And I grew up, though, watching the Today Show every morning with my parents before I would go to school. And I just loved Katie Couric. I idolized her. I thought she was just a sensation and was somebody who I was interested in hearing the news from, because she was super relatable, and I thought really smart. So that's what kind of started it all off. And my mom was a big influence on me and still is, and she strongly encouraged me to go to Smith College, which is in Massachusetts. It's an all-women's school. And so I really got a fantastic education there, and, actually learned a lot about storytelling through that education, which is a liberal arts education. But I majored in English, so I took a lot of really fantastic writing courses. But I was also the editor of the school newspaper, and so sort of like had great internships. So sort of honed some of those skills, while I was studying. And then after I graduated, I interviewed for a position at MSNBC here, and I did not get it. And I had subsequently 4 more interviews for different positions, and then finally, on the 5th interview, I got hired there, and that's really what kind of set it all off. And I sort of just bounced around from network to network and got a real understanding for how the news industry works behind the scenes, and, sort of a broader understanding of, just the industry at large. And reached a point in my career where I just sort of felt like I was not as inspired working in TV as I once had been. When you're young, it's very exciting. And, I had to travel sometimes at the drop of a hat. And, when there was breaking news, it's very exciting. But then, you kind of get older and you're like, okay, well, now I have to cancel this vacation and I have to stay here at work until 10 o'clock because of this breaking story. And I just didn't have the same passion for it anymore. And so I started my PR career really because I got laid off from the show I was working on at CNBC. It had gotten canceled. So everybody on the show was let go. And I sent an email out to everyone I know saying, I lost my job. I need a job. I was only 27 or whatever, 28 at the time. And I got back an email that changed the whole course of my career. It was from a publicist, and I had worked closely with him booking his guests on CNBC. And he said, I would love your help. I know you haven't done PR work, but I think you'd be great. You know a lot of people. And if you can help me, book my client on any show on CNBC, we can figure out, an arrangement. And I said, all right. And he sent me info on his client, and I was able to get his client booked instantaneously on a show on CNBC. And that was sort of my light bulb moment where I said, okay, well, people want to get on TV. I know the producers, I know how it works. And so that's how it all started.
Wow. So it sounds like you saw an opportunity and you just grabbed it. And that's what entrepreneurship is really about, is just kind of giving things a crack. That's what we say in Australia. It's an Australianism, but amazing. So we've actually got somebody commenting whilst we're talking on Facebook, which is awesome. So hi, Nicole, who's listening. She's got a question for you.
Okay.
She would like to know, who are some of the big names that you've represented or gotten on TV? I'd love to know, what's that one moment where you're like, wow, I can't believe that I'm booking this person to get on TV or something, I'm sure you've got lots of juicy gossip on some big, so let's hear it all.
Well, probably the most, the biggest in terms of news value was from a long time ago, is from maybe 8 years ago. There was a big story and trial here in the United States from a woman named Casey Anthony. I don't know if you all remember that, but it was a big crime story where she was on trial for, the abduction and murder of her young daughter. It was a big sensation here in the U.S., a horrible story. I actually wound up working with a prosecutor, with the attorney who was trying to, get some justice for her young little daughter, and was going after her, in the trial. He knew that this would be the last case of his career. And so we started talking and figuring out a path forward for him, afterwards. And afterwards, meaning when the trial ended and when he retired from the DA's office. And so we were able to get him on the Today Show, on The View, on with Dr. Drew. But the exciting thing was that I was also able to get him a book deal. And so he got a book deal with HarperCollins through a good friend and producer who I worked with at Good Morning America years ago. And we signed the deal. It turned out to be a New York Times bestseller. It was called Imperfect Justice. And that was kind of like a big moment, where I was able to kind of have a little gravitas with some of the former producers I had worked with, and also learn a little bit about like the literary agency side. But I don't really work with like celebrities, so I don't have, I don't have too much gossip. Unfortunately, I don't have anything too juicy to tell. I mean, when I was working in TV, I booked and worked with a lot of different celebrities. But, most of the times they're all pretty well behaved when they're coming in for, a news type of interview.
And so who's like the biggest name celebrity that you've booked?
I mean, I've booked Goldie Hawn, Bon Jovi, like other lots of big. I can't even remember now because it was like so long ago, But a lot of big ones, I would say. And yeah, I'm trying to think. There's not too many that really stand out, because honestly, like, this is the thing about when you work in TV. You're dealing with this stuff all the time and you're there to work. Like, you have to make sure that it all comes together perfectly. So you don't have a lot of time to let the fame aspect of it settle in, because you need to be professional in what you're doing.
Yeah. You don't have time to be starstruck, it sounds like.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's and also, they don't want to, like, the celebrities that come in, like, for news interviews. I mean, they're gracious, of course, but they're there to kind of get in and to get out, and promote whatever they're doing. So that's really what the deal is.
Amazing. So there's obviously an election going on in the States at the moment, and in Australia, a lot of people are watching this election very, very closely.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really get why we're so interested in US politics, but everyone around the world is, because I guess you're one of the big powerhouses, and there's a lot of divisive kind of. Well, there's a massive divide between Trump and Biden. So from your perspective, what's the feeling like over there? And do you think that Trump's going to win?
I hope not. So we'll see. I think that the country is much more divided than it feels like in New York, where I'm based, and probably how it feels like in many other big cities, across the country, which are typically more left-leaning. We spent the summer on the Jersey Shore, and we're able to get out of the city and had a rental house down there and everything. And there was a lot of Trump signs on people's lawns and flags hanging, and it was a bit of a shock, because it's only an hour outside of the city. So it's very, very close. It's a commuting suburban town. But it was very pro-Trump. So that was kind of an eye-opener to me. We were just back this past weekend, and now there's a lot of Biden signs and flags and everything. So it's more even now. But I think Biden's going to win, but I also like hope he's going to win. So I don't know if it's the hope or the reality, because none of us are really trusting the polls, even though the polls say he's so
right.
That's what they said about Hillary too. And, we know how that turned out. So, but I can see why Australians and everyone around the world is interested, because it's become like a spectacle, it's become a media sensation. And I mean, it's really just because I've never seen anything like this in as long as I've worked in media, which is almost for 20 years. And mostly that's because of Trump's like tweeting and how much he's on social media, and giving just a lot of really personal, brash in your face kind of takeaways on really important issues is not what we're used to. I don't know if any country is really used to that style of leadership. I think that's why, you know what I mean? It's just people are so interested is because they're getting it fed to them constantly. There's no respite. There's no break from it.
Yeah, he's definitely very polarizing, and there's a lot of people in Australia who we have a huge proportion of Australia that's quite right wing. So we have a lot of people who love Trump and think he's amazing. My dad's one of them. My dad lives in the country, and he thinks that Trump's amazing. So it's just really interesting and bizarre to watch. And yeah, we're waiting. When does the actual election happen? Like, what's the date of the? Because some people say, and people follow politics and who are into this stuff. Some people say that a lot of what's going on in Australia is linked to what's going on in America, where we have very strong ties with America politically. And so, everyone's kind of waiting for the election to be over, and then that will determine what happens next, according to some people. So when does the election happen? Is it the end of October?
It's November 3rd is election day. And so I think it's like 27 days away or something like that. And I mean, I think that pretty much all of Americans are ready for it to be over, at this point. But the issue is with so much mail-in voting and, absentee voting, unless it's a landslide victory one way or another, we probably will not have a declared, winner until probably even a month after election day.
Wow.
So just brace yourself, because it won't actually be over for a while after that, I don't think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So what's going on over there in regards to coronavirus and lockdown? And, I don't want to bang on about this for too long, because everyone's over talking about it. I mean, no one so much as Melbournians, because we are still in stage 4 lockdown when we have pretty much 0 cases. So we're just watching what's going on in the rest of the world, and we're all quite just dumbfounded about how we are being treated. I don't know if you've seen anything about Australia or Melbourne on the news, because apparently we have made the news in many countries because of our how full on our lockdowns are compared to our numbers. So in New York, it was obviously a hot spot, and you had a lot of people die, and it was, if I can go by what I saw on the news, it seemed pretty full on there. So tell us what it was like, and then where are you at now, and what's going on in the rest of America? Like, are you still under any form of lockdown?
No, there's no lockdown anymore whatsoever in New York or anywhere in the States. So, people are free to move about. There are quarantine rules for when you cross state lines. But that changes very frequently based on, how severe the cases are and state by state. I mean, when the lockdown first happened here in early March, I mean, it was horrifying. It was terrible. I was petrified to leave my apartment, because we just didn't know anything about how it was transmitted, et cetera, et cetera. And, as you mentioned, I mean, New York was the epicenter in the United States, you know, for the cases. And, you know, we're all living in apartment buildings. And so even to go outside, you have to go out your front door to a hallway, and then you have to get in an elevator, and then you have to go through a lobby, you know, and then you're on the street. So, you know, back in March, all of that seemed so incredibly daunting, to me at least anyway, I think to a lot of people. But we, you know, we unfortunately had a neighbor, an elderly neighbor directly across the hall pass away of COVID in March. And I mean, I saw the EMT come in, you know, I saw everything that was happening, and it was really.
I'm sorry, that's something we don't know what that means.
EMT is like, are the, you know, the medical workers, like,
kind of.
Yes. And so it's, so they came because he had passed away. And so they came, and it was just a very traumatic experience, you know, to see that, and to be so close to it because, you know, like you mentioned your dad in the country, and I'm thinking of, you know, relatives of mine who live in suburban areas, you know, it just wasn't as scary, right? Because like they're not, but in New York, the cases were going up crazy. I mean, we were having like, you know, 1,000 deaths a day, you know, which is insane. And so it was really scary. There was probably like a 3-week period where I did not even leave my apartment at all. And I do not have a large apartment, and I have a 2-year-old in addition to a husband. So it was kind of crazy. But now it's like a lot better. And so I think that, you know, whatever you see on the media, always just take with a grain of salt, because while there are certainly parts of the city, like maybe in Soho, downtown, where there's not as many people living there, you know, or certainly in Midtown, where many of the businesses are all remote now, it's quiet, you know, and there's not a lot going on. But we live on the Upper West Side, which is a very residential, family-oriented neighborhood. So most of the restaurants are still open, you know, they're just, everyone's dining outside, you know, many stores closed, but a lot of them made it, you know, and are still open. So it just feels different. But no, as long as you have your mask on now, you can come and go, you know. I mean, it's all at your own risk because we're still very much like in a pandemic, you know, and I think they're expecting that it's going to get bad again, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, and so like how many cases a day are you getting there, like new cases? That's what we're like obsessed with here. I'm not, because I'm over it, but like yeah, like how many new cases a day
you know what? I don't even know exactly how many new cases there are. We have passed, you know, a large number of, we're over 200,000 who have died from it here in the United States, which is a very alarming figure. But I don't know the exact numbers because I only now really pay attention to like hyper local where I am. And so on the Upper West Side, or where we go in New Jersey, it's very, very, very low, you know, extremely low. And so there's been a recent uptick in New York, but it's been in mostly Orthodox Jewish religious communities where they're still having large gatherings and not taking any precautions, you know?
Yeah. And so when you go outside, you have to wear a mask, or when you so when you're outside, what about when you're exercising?
As I've seen, I don't exercise outside. I have a Peloton bike, so I do mine inside, but I've seen people running with a mask and without a mask, and I've seen people biking with and without a mask. You know, I think I think most people in New York feel like when you're outside, and if you're being mindful of not getting too close to somebody, like if you're exercising, it's okay, you know. But when we go for a walk, or we take our daughter to the playground, or, you know, or anything like that, or get in an Uber ride or a taxi or anything like that, we always keep our masks on for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, it's very, very different approaches. And I think that this has been the most interesting thing, is watching how each different country is really dealing with this pandemic. Like, would you say that in America there's talk of a somewhat herd immunity?
I don't think we're there yet. No,
Yeah.
I don't think that is a possibility here, because I just don't think enough people, have been infected with it to cause the herd immunity. But I think most people would agree that the pandemic has not been handled well whatsoever. I mean, from the onset of when, our leadership knew about it, and didn't really do too much, to even just how it was all handled early days, because it was only certain states went into lockdown, it wasn't all of the states. And, I just remember listening to this, to a New York Times podcast, and the scientist was saying that, if our country had for 2 weeks, literally everybody was on lockdown and did not leave, only left if they had to get groceries or go to the hospital, that in 2 weeks, basically it would be gone, and we would be able to get through it. But, Americans are very big on not wanting their liberty to be jeopardized or compromised in any way. And so it was sort of that struggle of like, some people saying, no, don't tell me that I have to stay at home. I'm going to go out and do this, versus another group of people that were like, you know what, this sucks. And like, everybody hates it, but let's all like be in it together. So that way we can get through it on the other side,
Yeah, it's really interesting because we've got a similar situation in Australia where we have a federal government, but then we have state-based government, and every state has dealt with the pandemic differently. So there's no unified approach. We now have border closures within our own country that is really impacting on a lot of people who have family members over the border of another state that they can't see if they're sick or dying, or like, it's crazy. And in Melbourne and Victoria, we were the only state that when people did their hotel quarantine, we didn't have the Defence Force or police guarding the people in the hotels. We had private security guards, and that is why Victoria had a massive second wave, because most of the other states in Australia have 0 cases now. They eradicated it because they locked down. And so, yeah, it's really raised a lot of concerns around our system of government and how broken it is, because, as you said, if you don't have a unified approach and you don't have like the president or prime minister, in our case, saying, this is what we're going to do, this is what each state is going to do, just do it, we have different outcomes, and that is really coming back to bite us.
Yeah.
Like, every state is about to open out their borders on the 26th of October. For interstate travel, which sounds bizarre because it's like we've got 7 different countries. We've got 7 states. You've got a lot more states in the US. But everyone's opening up to everyone except for Victoria. So us Victorians are literally locked in our own state. So it's an interesting situation, because they were talking about we're not trying to eradicate the virus, but essentially we are not allowed to go to any kind of semblance of normal life until we have 0 cases.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert in it, but that doesn't seem to be really a very feasible approach, because, if one person has it, they may have infected, God forbid, 10 people who are then going to go on. And so I don't think until there's a vaccine will there ever be potentially 0 cases. I mean, I just don't see that really happening. If people have to travel, they have to go places, they have to go out. I think from what I've experienced and learned, from different experts and in the media, is really just that it's about just taking the right precautions, and so we have a president who up until very recently didn't want to wear a mask, and didn't think that it was something that he, seated as the president of the United States, should really try to, enforce and encourage and speak to his base about. And so I think, like, from what I've learned anyway, if you're wearing a mask and you're, when you're around people and you're washing your hands and, not touching your face before you wash your hands and things like that, it reduces your chances by a lot, and so that's, I don't know, that's made me feel less nervous about it because I'm like, okay, I'm just going to like do these things, and every day I feel like it's, I'm taking little steps, like more steps back towards being normal. Like today I rode the subway for the first time since like early March. And, I was kind of excited actually to ride it. And it was like, fine. It was no big deal because New York isn't that crowded right now. So it's like easy to maintain, some distance and everything like that. So I don't know.
So most people working from home still, like are you working from home or are you going to an office?
Well, so I am now lucky to be able to go to an office. I chose not to renew our lease for our office because everybody has been working from home so well, and we're certainly not essential in any way, shape, or form. So, and I don't think people really feel comfortable commuting and, and all of that. But for me in particular, my husband still has an office. And so now we go into his office every day. We are usually the only people there. So it's like kind of fun, but it's not exactly like normal by any sense, but it is very, very satisfying to get back into a routine where, you wake up, you shower, you brush your teeth, you put on clothes and you leave, just the act of doing that has really, I think, boosted my mood a lot in the past month or so.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like just having somewhere to go and having purpose and having a routine is so, so important. It makes you feel safe. It gives you like focus. So it's a really interesting kind of world and year, particularly in the media. I mean, the media this year has been, I think, obsessed with COVID. Like that's all you hear about. Like from a PR perspective, are you over just covering COVID stuff? Like, do you think that it's kind of been too much? And like, there's a lot of talk about the media really scaring people and using this to create a lot of fear. What would your view be on that?
No, I know the theory of where you're coming from, and I don't personally feel sick of the coronavirus coverage. I mean, we're in a pandemic. Like I would like to get out of a pandemic, and so I would like to know where we stand as it regards to that and what other information I need to know. So I don't find that to be the case. I am extremely tired of covering the election. And here I would say that if anything, I think most Americans feel the malaise as it pertains to, the general election. So I think everyone's going to be really happy when we can just put that behind us because, it's not even talking about issues that Americans are facing. It's just about who's winning. Let's, take a jab at him, then I'm going to get him back on Twitter. It's just like, it doesn't feel like it's really benefiting anybody, like the whole process. So I'm over that. I don't think that the media has been using the virus to scare Americans in any way. I mean, but you do have to remember the TV networks are also interested in ratings. Like that's what they care about. And so, before March 15th or whatever the date was, that the WHO declared a pandemic, Fox News barely was talking about, the coronavirus in time compared to the other networks. They were covering it much, much less. But the second it was declared a pandemic, they went 24/7 coverage with it, as did all the other networks, because then people want to tune in. You know what I mean? They want to watch that. And, like CNN, this is CNN's bread and butter. Like CNN gets their highest ratings when they're in a continual breaking news, like sort of cycle. And so, if you understand that, then no, I don't think that CNN is trying to scare us in any way, because that's what they do. That's how they cover big breaking news stories, but Fox News has to, knows who their audience is, and they know what kind of programming they're going to want to listen to. So it's really not even that complicated,
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, we have probably similar situation in Australia where we have 4 news channels and they all have kind of different audiences and they're all tackling this the same. 3 of them, it's just all about fear, and just even the language that they use about the pandemic and the stories that they run is very much ratings grab, because people, they love watching a train wreck, right? They just want to sit there and obsess about it, and I find it very unhealthy to just sit there and watch this and focus on all of the negatives, and then people they're just terrified. Like, there's people here who are literally living in fear, and we have in Victoria 14 new cases a day. Like, I got sick last week and I thought, oh my God, I've got COVID. But then I thought it'd be actually like winning tax lotto. It'd be that hard to get it, given there's 14 people in the whole state who have it. Like, wow. How would I have got it? I haven't been anywhere. I haven't really seen anyone. So, but yeah, it's a crazy year. So, like, what's the future look like, do you think, for PR? Like, obviously, do you think that this whole year is just COVID and the pandemic, or like, what are you looking forward to at the end of this year in terms of maybe transitioning to some kind of normal and getting back to the good news stories that people want to hear?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that this year, 2020, is the pandemic and the election. I mean, those are the 2 main things. In terms of broadcast television and TV news bookings, I am very much looking forward to having more of a variety of types of segments that are covered, because I think it's important to have a focus on international news, financial news, health story, medical, what other types of stories, have relevancy, to us as a society. But a lot of that really changed leading up to the election 4 years ago, so 6 years ago, because it was, an open contest, on both sides. And that was really, the media made a big deal about it. And so it just changed where, our focus in TV was just so much on politics and Trump, like 24/7. And now, of course, the virus. I think that in terms of PR for this year, we've done a good job of aligning various clients of ours as thought leaders within their own industry as to how they handled the adverse effects of the pandemic, or where they saw opportunities, or we created opportunities for them to talk about maybe their leadership style, under such crazy circumstances. And some reporters, at different magazines or different websites or whatever, are still covering other stuff, than just these 2 big stories. But it had to be sort of balanced with that care, because, you don't want to go promoting sort of a lighter, fluffier story when, maybe you're pitching a reporter who, God forbid, has a family member who's sick, or, it's like, or just is, we're in this pandemic. So I think that, next year there will just be more opportunities, like how it used to be, for brands that are not in any way related to the pandemic or the election. But I think that the pandemic this is not going to sound the right way I want to say it, but it's going to like open doors for different types of companies, like telemedicine, and health tech companies, and leading experts in the medical and science professions, for companies who are creating various remote work options, or psychotherapy, or like whatever, there's a lot of businesses that have seen an increase, in need because they're helping people in different ways right now. So that's kind of cool. And I think there's just going to be more of that because I think a lot of people from years to come are going to work remotely or at least have some sort of hybrid system. So kind of that aspect of our lives, I think is going to be changed for a long time.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that that's a change for the better because, doing the death march into the office 5 days a week, I think that it's pretty archaic and it's not the most effective nor healthy way for people to work, not just for the people, but also the environment. Like I interviewed someone last week who was talking about emissions and how they've reduced globally, I think I can't remember the exact, I don't want to quote it because I'll probably get it wrong. I think it was like 7% or something. So I think there has been some real benefits to this pandemic. It's definitely made a lot of people reassess their situation. And there are winners out of this that are doing really, really well. And there always will be. And that's just life, right? But it's been so interesting talking to you and hearing your story. I've absolutely loved it, and I'm sure our listeners have too. So if people have an amazing story or they want to get their heads on television in the US, they can contact you and pitch their story. Is that right?
Yeah. If, we're also, my company is offering free 30-minute consultations. If anybody has questions about how to sort of navigate through the world of PR and the media, especially in light of, the pandemic and everything that's happening. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody who's listening, who's interested in PR, the media, et cetera. But yeah, if you want to reach out, you can drop me a line on our website, which is pacepublicrelations.com, or you could find me at Twitter. It's at Annie Scranton.
Amazing. Well, thank you for generously giving us your time and sharing some really cool information about what's going on in the US right now and in New York. I love New York. I can't wait to come back one day. It's such a beautiful city. So I hope you have a great day, and thanks very much for being on the show.
Thank you. This was so fun.
No problems.